everyone. I'm Hugo.
And I am Jake.
And this is the Bible Reloaded, and we're back yet again to take another look at a movie.
At a movie called Hell House. This is one of our number one requested documentaries to watch since we did, I think, God Loves Uganda. And this is actually more on the serious side, which is surprising.
I was surprised so many people had requested it, because after they did, we went looking for it. It's actually a little bit hard to find, and I'm hoping you people can find it somewhere on YouTube or wherever.
It's very good.
It's a little bit difficult. It's a good movie, and on the surface, we picked it because it's sort of Halloween-themed, and it's October. But underneath, surprisingly, there was more to be said than I think either of us expected.
Oh, a ton more. And it has like a 94 on Rotten Tomatoes, so I didn't know if I had the right film at first.
Right.
So that was very interesting. So let's get into this movie review, and just so everyone knows, yes, I am sick, so it's fine. I'll live. I'll make it through. It's okay.
I believe in you.
Thanks.
Like Tinkerbell, we just gotta clap our hands. I believe Jake can use his voice for however long this takes. Everyone out there in the comments, clap for him.
Thanks, guys.
Alright, he's alive. Here we go. So the movie opens with a man with a white background talking about how he feels that it's like the church's mission to go out and tell everyone how the culture that we live in is evil and it's dangerous for everyone.
So at one point, someone calls like what they're doing like reaping a harvest. It's very off-putting at first, especially for, obviously, we are atheists, and I've never been religious, so it's extra weird for me.
Yeah, it's a little weird. It's like they're taking this Jesus' Great Commission to the nth degree and making sure that these are cultural warriors. This is what you would call that if you were to use the term cultural warriors. You see a little bit of this. Definitely a very similar group of people to the people in, like, Jesus Camp, for instance.
Yeah, they're very
not quite
Jesus
as extreme, because they're evangelicals, and these guys are Pentecostals. There is a little bit of a difference, but there's definitely some similarities. And if you were to watch both films back to back, you could definitely see where the ideologies are very similar. So just so you know, that's where they're coming from.
And one of those threads that I think both sides of that very evangelical sort of proselytizing sects of Christianity, he mentions that he feels if he doesn't warn people, their blood is on his hands, and it's sort of his responsibility to witness to these people. And that's kind of a driving force to the people that show up at your doorstep, or the kind of people that put shitty comic books in your Halloween basket, or drop them in trucker stops. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the kind of person that does that. Yeah. So that's what I always say to people, like, when they get mad at people that do that kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, but they genuinely think it's like their prerogative to do so, and they're bad for not. Like, I kind of feel for all these people, because it's out of, like, ignorance that they do this.
The movie is definitely what I took from it, at least in part. There's a couple different moral messages that I would take from it, but first and foremost is definitely that we can all sit here and laugh at the people doing the silly things that we think are silly. For instance, if you look at our other movie reviews, like God Loves Uganda, and the people speaking in tongues, we definitely take a shot at that.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it's important, especially in a community like this, the atheist community, if you want to call it that, whatever, to recognize that even though these are silly things to us, and even though we do think that they are incorrect, there are always people behind the actions. I think it's very easy to dehumanize the people that aren't in our in-group, and this movie does a very good job of humanizing these people that, though you disagree with them, you still see, well, they're a person, and I can kind of understand where they're coming from. They're wrong, but I understand personally why this is important to them.
Right. And moving forward after this, we're going to get into basically the pre, mid, post production of the entire Hell House, and then I think they only show the first night it's live, and this starts almost immediately.
I guess we should probably explain briefly what a Hell House is if you haven't heard of it. A Hell House, if you don't know, certain churches, usually evangelical or Pentecostal or whatever, usually they're a little more hardline, because they were opposed to Halloween and traditional Halloween things. I say traditional, but more modern, things like haunted houses and trick-or-treating. They'll do what's called a Hell House, and in a Hell House, it's modeled like a haunted house, but instead of ghosts or serial killers or whatever scary things that jump out at you, it's a series of rooms with different setups for things that are sins. For instance, there might be a room about homosexuality or drunk driving or whatever.
Abortion, rape, stuff like that.
Yeah, and then in the final room, it's a depiction of hell, and it's supposed to scare you into becoming a Christian or being re-devoted to your Christian values. Whatever.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's what this is. This entire documentary is a huge hell house. This is like one of the first ones, I guess, according to the documentary. Now we get a shot of the meeting room, and you see this same group of people meeting. They're very vague. This documentary, one criticism I would definitely have is there's no any sort of name recognition, usually in a documentary like this, at least a more modern one. Again, this came out in 2001, by the way. A more modern documentary, if this had come out just a couple years later. It's pretty standard to when you see a person for the first time, or if you haven't seen them in a while, for a name to pop up or something. They don't do that here, so it's a little hard to keep people straight. You gotta know by their faces. But they're leaders in the church. I don't think the pastor is there because it seems like a pretty big mega church, but this is the group of people who come together every year and plan this huge ordeal, because it does seem like an ordeal. And this first meeting, they sit down and they try and decide what's the theme going to be, because like any haunted house, even though it is Jesus-y, it needs a theme, and they decide, well, people who don't have Jesus in their hearts, they're essentially dead inside, so the theme this year is The Walking Dead.
Yeah, and this is pre-good The Walking Dead. I think Kirkman ripped them off.
Yeah, if anything, they should be suing Kirkman right now and they're getting all that AMC money.
But yeah, so they sit down and they talk about the different scenarios that they'll do. They do very shock horror sort of things, if you want to call it that, where they'll show like a woman bleeding from a botched abortion and stuff like that. And they talk about drunk driving, abortions, and they come up with the idea how they've been doing a Columbine-inspired scene since this came out in 2001. So 2 years running, they did a Columbine scene, which hits a little close. And I think maybe they should do a 9/11 one this year. I'm just saying.
Maybe. And bear in mind, remember, this took place in 2001 or so, 2001.
Yeah.
And remember, there weren't like school shootings every week. Remember when Columbine was like a huge deal?
Yeah.
So like, it seems like that would have been a huge emotionally charged thing they probably shouldn't have touched at the time. And I'm not a person who's like too soon type person, obviously, but it's like...
No, but it's insensitive at a certain point. Like, there's a difference between like making a joke or a reference, or even like, you know, bringing it up in sort of an insensitive way, but kind of reenacting it. I don't know, for means that aren't necessarily the best.
I think the difference is definitely intent. When you're making a joke about something that's like a too soon joke, it's for humor.
That's kind of the joke, is that it's too soon as well.
Yeah. However, they're using this as a tool. They're trying to use the Columbine tragedy, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. They're using it as a tool to try and scare people into their way of thinking. And that's kind of a jerky thing to do.
Well, I mean, think of it in the context of like Sandy Hook. If they had a classroom filled with little kids and some come and blew them away, and then it was like, hey, choose Jesus.
Yeah.
You'd be like, come the fuck on.
So they start in this room, they're doing pitches for the different stuff, because they always do like homosexuality or whatever, but they do it a little different each year. And one of them, this is a weird sequence that I don't totally understand and isn't explained very well, but one of the younger members says they want to do a skit that takes place in like a lesbian bar, and they're going to have a whole thing with that. Yeah. But the head guy says no because he thinks it's too much, and he just wants to do the same AIDS hospital scene they've been doing. Yeah. I don't understand how he thinks a lesbian bar is too much. Like, yeah, lesbian bars exist and lesbians exist together. Is it too weird to you to picture them together? He follows it up by saying he doesn't want to do it for the same reason that they don't have boyfriend-girlfriend skits, because they spend a lot of time together in practice and he's afraid something's going to happen. So he thinks if he casts two women from his church in a lesbian skit... Yeah. They're somehow going to form some sort of relationship. Does he think if two women spend too much time together, their vaginas like a magnet scissor together and they just can't help but become lesbians? I don't understand.
That's exactly what happens with him when he hangs around with his best guy friends. So, I mean...
I get it.
Oh. And then they cut to people talking about hell, and basically everyone's giving their own version of hell. And it's a talking head thing. It's actually kind of a cool shot because they did it... They kind of pointed it up, and it was like kind of a cloudy day, so it was like white behind them. It was actually really neat. And one person describes it as a place of fire and torment. Another person is basically it's a personal torment based upon your greatest fears, and he thinks it's a solitary thing. And another person describes it as more torment, of course, because you know what loving God wouldn't love to torment people. But also that it's like you'll replay all the times you had to accept Jesus over and over in your head. It's weird. Those are weird hells.
I always think the concept of hell is weird because, again, I used to be religious and I did used to believe it, but I don't think when I was religious I ever really thought it through. It was just a thing that I took for granted. Like, oh
Right.
yeah, hell's a thing you go when you die if you're not a Christian.
Right.
It's not something I ever thought about. But when you think about it, none of these versions of hell make any sense for a simple reason of a punishment doesn't really make sense in the context of never being let out of the punishment. And I'd say this is even true. You could say that life sentences are similar. And yeah, I could see what you're saying, but that's more to keep people safe. In this instance, you're punishing someone for eternity for a finite crime, and then they never learn anything from it because they're not let out of the punishment. You're literally just being vindictive and torturing them forever.
It was kind of jarring to hear all the people talk about it so seriously, because again, I've never experienced that in person. Like with people that I trust and love, it's always been outliers or people that I've just run into. It's just weird to see a close-knit community because it's a pretty small town. I don't know. They just very sincerely are like, yeah, this is where I think it is. And it was weird to see them deadpan discuss it. And I've seen it before, but the way they pull it off in this one, it was just a little bit, I don't know, it unsettled.
Maybe I'm just more used to it than you, I guess, because I did grow up in a church and stuff. So I don't know. It wasn't as weird to me. We get a montage of the auditions for the various parts because the younger kids and the teenagers in the church, they act out the stuff in the Hell House.
These are great.
In fairness, this is a very funny part because it's these kids doing these very over-dramatic scenes like, oh, I had an abortion and now I'm doomed.
Yeah, it's so over the top. It's so great. It's like watching an off-Broadway play by a guy that takes himself too seriously.
It's kind of like watching a live-action Chick Tract, if you've ever read a Chick Tract or seen the things we do with them on the channel. It's like that, but with children acting it out. So that's a lot of fun. They talk about abortion, suicide, incest, all the standard stuff. What's interesting about this to me is in this movie, they'll deal with these different topics, these very serious topics actually, and while it is funny to watch people overact these situations, bear in mind that things like, rape and AIDS and forced incest and suicide, these are issues that real people deal with and isn't just this funny game and tool to be used, and they actually, I don't think the people who were in the documentary meant to do this, but they actually show an interesting juxtaposition between some of the members of the church and the way they're using these issues in the Hell House. For instance, the first one, there's this woman who talks about how she was in the Hell House last year, or a couple of years ago, and she's one of the actresses, quote, who does the performances, and she was playing the woman who gets sexually assaulted. She happened to look out into the group of people walking through the Hell House, and she had been raped in the past, and the person who had raped her was in the audience. So here she was playing a rape victim with her actual rapist watching her play this. It's very interesting and an interesting way to kind of show, hey, yeah, we're kind of doing this for our own means to try and turn people to Jesus and scare them, but also these are issues that actually real people face and can be incredibly traumatic.
And it was really messed up, too, because she goes on to mention, like, at that moment I decided that I hadn't ever really faced it and got over this, meaning that she was in an entirely unhealthy situation, and if anyone knew who was running the play put her in that position on purpose, like, holy shit, that's messed up. She should have gotten some help. Like, she clearly needed some sort of outlet for that. And I don't think reenacting her trauma over and over is a good, like, exposure therapy, not a great therapy for rape victims.
So next we cut to who I would almost call the main character. He's not really, but I think he's the story that gets the most fleshed out throughout, other than the story of the Hell House itself. And this guy's name is John Cassers. We go to his house. He gets up really early in the morning. It looks like 5 or 6 in the morning. I'm not exactly sure, but it's still dark out. And he's making his 4 kids breakfast on his own. His wife isn't there. His story, I think, is important for a couple of reasons, but mainly I think it's good for people who are atheists to see that the people behind the crazy shit that we make fun of are real people with real problems, and even though we have our disagreements, they're still just trying to do their best. And this guy is the best example of this I've ever seen, because this guy's life looks like the most stressful thing I have ever seen with my eyes.
I legitimately feel bad for the guy, like, most of the film, and he's very, very religious. He's doing a lot of, like, he's running around taking care of 4 kids, 2 of which I believe are special needs, correct?
Yes.
One definitely has cerebral palsy, right? And the other one,
yes.
I don't know what's wrong with her, but she's got some, because she gets on the special needs bus at one point. And she's clearly needs some, I don't know what it is, but she clearly doesn't have all of her faculties.
Actually, the first time we see him in that scene, he's making the breakfast, and then he comes up, and one of his kids, who's in the high chair, I think it's his youngest, is kind of leaning over really weird, and he goes, oh boy, and he grabs him. The kid's having a seizure, because I guess the kind of cerebral palsy this kid has, they're prone to seizures. So he lays this kid on the bed, and this kid is having a seizure, not like a really shaky seizure like you see in movies and stuff, but like the kind of seizure where you actually seize up and can't move, and it's hard to breathe, which is incredibly frightening, honestly.
I don't know what kind it is, but I know it's not a grand mal.
I don't have kids. I don't ever want kids, but I cannot even imagine how scary
the
it
stress
must
of
be.
that would be ridiculous, yeah.
Yeah, as a parent, having to watch your kid being completely helpless and there's nothing you can do about it. And in this scene, he calls 911, and he's praying at the same time. And this was such a weird, bittersweet, sad, depressing moment for me as someone who doesn't believe, because he's praying, calling 911. The kid comes out of the seizure as he's on 911 waiting, and he tells 911, oh, it's okay, he's out, whatever. Hangs up the phone, and he's like, oh, you're all right, because I was praying over you, or whatever. They're Pentecostal, by the way. I think we mentioned it, but if you don't know, Pentecostals are very about spiritual warfare, healing people with the power of the Spirit, lots of Holy Spirit stuff
Talk in tongues, shit like that.
Yeah. And when I see this guy desperately praying over his sick son, I see a person who is desperately looking for control in his life that is just gone insane. And I desperately feel for this guy. I don't think there's anything that you can do with religion that you can't do without it, but I certainly, if anyone has the right to lie to themselves a little bit, it's this guy, because holy shit. How could you even deal?
And they reveal it later, but we might as well just talk about it now. His wife has left him and, like, cheated on him, had an affair with some guy from the internet, and just left the entire family with the 4 kids, 2 of which need special needs. This guy, I mean, not the greatest looking dude, but he seems like a genuinely nice person, although I disagree with him in a very large portion of his life. And then he's, like, gathered all the kids around, he's getting everyone off the bus, he's... Like, they're filming him, and he gets one of the older special needs kid on the bus, and then he talks to the bus driver, like, I'm going to pick her up at 2. And then he takes the other kids, he drives them to school, and then the girl's asking him to do some shit, and then he just sits there, they just cut to him after she walks out, and he just says, stress. And it's like, holy shit, man.
Half the shots in this movie with him, it looks like he's on the verge of a nervous breakdown.
He's like always sweaty
all
too.
The time.
And it's not like funny sweaty. It's not like, oh, he's fat and sweaty. It's like he's legit just stressed so much.
Yeah. So we'll get back to him later, because his story is actually very, very morose.
Yeah.
That's the only word I have that
It's
accurately
pretty sad,
describes it. But now we move on to, they show the school, because I guess there was this Christian school affiliated with the church that does the Hell House, and they show a little bit. Yep. I thought this was very interesting. It was a weird blast from the past for me, because I went to a Christian school, not just a normal Christian school, though. When I was watching these scenes and listening to the people talk and seeing how the kids dress, it was just like how my school was, and it was so weird. They talk about how their entire curriculum is taught from a Christian perspective, as it is. It's just insane. Like, all their world history, their United States history, it all goes through this filter of this perspective of Christianity being correct.
And that rubbed me the wrong way, because the teacher was there up front, and he's writing on top of the board, and he's like, don't ask, ask questions, don't ask dumb questions. Like, and then he starts talking about how, like, it's all through the lens that God is there. And they legit have textbooks that say, like, Spanish for Christians, whatever that means.
Yeah, what bugged me the most, you just briefly mentioned it, was the 2 rules he had, which was ask questions and don't ask dumb questions. And let me tell you what, being from a school like that, I'll tell you what don't ask dumb questions means. It means don't ask any questions about the faith that are hard for us to answer. And he even says, when he says don't ask dumb questions, he's like, I don't want you giving me the runaround. If I think you're taking me down a rabbit hole, I'm going to tell you about it, and we're going to have a talk after class. He legitimately means, and I've met people like this in that school, and I can tell you right now, he means I don't want to be questioned on the faith that you're being taught. Accept it and don't ask difficult questions.
Yeah.
I'll answer, like, is this in the Bible or whatever, but I will not, like, I'm not going to have a theological debate with you. This is a Christian school. You're going to just accept what I'm telling you. And that bums me out, especially as I'm a proponent of education. It's incredibly important. The fact that you're telling these kids not to ask questions about the thing that they're being presented with, whether it's religion or anything, that pisses me off.
Yeah, and then we get a look into their church, which of course is the Pentecostal church they explain. And we get kind of the history of the church, and they explain how it had been started, I think, by a black guy, or eventually it was headed by a black guy at one point. And there was a split in the community, and basically they didn't want, some people, the large portion, did not want to be, like, under the black guy, and so they made their own church, which is super weird and off-putting.
That's just a history thing, but I do think it's interesting to look at the fact that this Pentecostal church basically was invented because they didn't want to be under a black bishop.
Granted, it was early 1900s, but still.
Yeah. Thanks, history. Teaching us a lot about how to not be dicks. Anyway.
This next scene was really frustrating.
I thought this was hilarious. They're rewriting the scripts because it's a couple months later or it's a couple of weeks later. This entire planning process takes a long, long time. They're rewriting the scripts for the Hell House. And they start discussing occult things. I say occult things with air quotes because they're not actually a cult. They're talking about Magic the Gathering cards, but they don't know what the name is. They're like, Magic for the Gathering? Magic the what? And they're like trying to have an argument.
The lady, though, is so stupid because the guy says, like, no, it's Magic, the Gathering. And she's like, well, I'm just going to call it the Gathering. And he's like, no, it's Magic. And she's like, okay, so just Magic? And he goes, no, it's Magic the Gathering. And then she has to retype it like 5 times. It was like, I don't care anymore. Can we move on?
I think it's so telling that these people who are writing a script about how evil and of the devil Magic the Gathering is, they don't even know what the name is. They know nothing about it. And I'm not into card games, but I know people, I've had friends who are really into Magic the Gathering. It's just a fun game. It's just a fun game, guys. Not everything that's fun is of the devil. So now we get another brief story about a volunteer, and this guy's a cop. He started out as just security for the Hell House, just making sure stuff didn't get too out of control, but then they started having him help out with the construction because it is a big undertaking. And now...
Yeah.
This is frustrating.
Is something.
He helps them with their firearms, because in this Hell House, when they have scenes with guns, instead of getting a toy gun or a prop gun, they use this guy's real firearms with blanks in them. I don't have a problem with guns, really at all. If you want to own a gun and you're a responsible gun owner, great. And I'm not really here to have a political discussion about gun control or whatever. I don't care. The point is, in one of his safety demonstrations, he takes the gun, someone next to him is holding a piece of cardboard about 2 feet from him, and he shoots the cardboard with the guy right holding the thing. Now, I've shot a gun all of twice in my life, but you do not shoot a gun in this instance. That is so stupid. And this was not a blank. This was a live round that he was firing into this cardboard for some reason. Incredibly stupid.
It was super weird.
We'll talk about the stupidity of the firearms later on, because trust me, it gets even stupider.
What I did find very impressive, though, is in the next scene, they're going through the construction of the entire Hell House. Yeah. Very impressed with their construction and their planning and all that. Like, they really want to make sure Hell House happens. I don't know if they have a lot of money, if it goes through the church, or if it's all donation, or everyone's a volunteer. I'm pretty sure they don't pay for a lot of stuff, especially in that community.
It was weird to me because it looked like they were building a permanent structure. I mean, I don't think it had a foundation, but they were doing the frames and the drywall and everything. It seems like instead of doing this for 10 years, because this was the 10th year they're doing it, why don't you just build a permanent little structure next to the church and then every year you reuse it? It seems a little weird and wasteful to me.
What I thought they were going to do is some of them looked modular, kind of like old mobile homes, but no, they were building them from scratch.
Yeah, super strange. I don't know if they still do the Hell House, I assume, because it was a huge thing for them. I wonder if now they've built a permanent structure. Because even though I disagree with what they're doing, I also disagree with wasting good contractors.
And then they have this weird discussion about, like, paint colors and how there should never be white during, like, Satan worship, especially on the pentagram. And someone grabbed, like, white candles at some point, and the guy gets, like, legitimately mad.
Yeah, he's like, we had an occult guy come through before, because yeah, I'm sure a lot of occult people were going through your fucking Hell House, and they complained because in our occult skit or whatever, there were white things, and apparently there's no white things in occult rituals. I assume that's bullshit. That just sounds way arbitrary and weird. But the funny thing is, then they like have a weird, awkward conversation. By the way, we didn't mention this. This movie is incredibly uncomfortable to watch because half the interactions are between super awkward people. It's very strange.
Yeah,
but you really
nobody
wanna
really
watch it.
has social graces.
But anyway, they get red paint, and the best part about this is when they do make the pentagram, they don't make a pentagram, they accidentally do a Star of David, and it's never addressed. They just film it very briefly, so I don't know if they told the people at the Hell House, like, hey, just so you know, that's not a pentagram.
It's pretty fantastic.
But I thought that was hilarious.
Okay, so there's a rave scene, just so you know, and it's going to be the date rape scene that we do later. But the guy in charge of the rave scene talks about all the raves he's been to, and I'm very skeptical on this. I've not been to a rave. I don't really care for that sort of thing, but I know people that have been to raves. They are all currently alive. He just talks about how they're all full of drugs, and he literally says, like, dozens of bodies get pulled out at every rave. I've never heard of these death raves ever.
At worst, if you're taking like E or something, you can dehydrate. So that's why a lot of the times at stuff like this, they hand out bottled water.
Maybe
to keep
drugged
hydrated.
people like that need help out, but not bodies.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then he talks about the rape drugs that are heavily used in there, and that I probably do believe. I assume, especially in the early 2000s, Rohypnol and stuff like that were starting to be used a lot more, and date rape was really starting to become an issue. But he doesn't know the name, but he describes it like he knows the name very intimately.
The weird thing is how he describes it. It clues me into the fact that a lot of these people are just on a completely different wavelength than I am, and there's no way I could effectively communicate certain ideas to them because we are just looking at the world and from completely different lenses. Like, you ever talk to someone and you just realize, wow, we are not living on the same planet.
Yep.
He says, he talks about Rohypnol, the date rape drug, whatever, as if it's something like Pfizer put out and they're going to market it like, oh, ask your doctor about Rohypnol, help you rape people. Like, he talks about it like it's this legitimate drug that's on the market. It's so strange.
After we talk about this, we get a weird cut, and I think they cut this kind of uncomfortably. We cut to John, the depressing guy's daughter, and she has a discussion with the camera about how her mom cheated on her dad, and I assume there was like abuse involved. She kind of skirts around the issue, but the fact she says like things got bad and then the cops got involved. I assume there was some sort of abuse involved, but they got like the files mixed up, I guess, and depressing guy got sent away and lost like custody for a month of the kids, so the kids went into foster care for a month. Like, that guy, worst life ever.
When she says they got the file mixed up, that sounds to me like something you say to a kid when you don't want to admit to them why they actually got taken away.
It was a very odd story, and that's where I'll leave it.
So like we just talked about, they go to a practice and they're running through that scene of the man finding out his wife is cheating, and then there's sort of abuse going on. It's interesting, and again, like I talked about earlier, there's this weird dichotomy because they switch between the sketch and the kids doing it, and they're laughing because they're just practicing, like, oh, ha, 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 abuse, and they're like that, and it cuts to his face, John's face.
It's very somber.
It's very somber. This dude, every time you look at him, it looks like it's a dude who's like been dead for 5 years inside. It's super depressing. And that comes down to, again, I mentioned it, but I think it's important to note, this is a group of people who have no idea the depth of the things they're talking about. They are in some weird fantasy world where this is all play stuff, and they don't understand the gravity of what they're talking about, and it's incredibly disrespectful to people who have actually been through these horrible circumstances.
So then we get into the part where they're pre-recording the voiceover work, and this is a lot of this goes towards the last room that they'll go to, which is hell, which will have people like saying, I did this, I was gay and I shouldn't have been gay, and it doubles their voice, so it gives like this sort of reverb effect, but their lip sync is off. It's awful. But anyways, during it, this kid says, when I was a kid, my uncle did things to me and it changed my life. He said I was born that way, and I believed that lie. Like, he got turned gay. Awkwardly, before that, he's like making jokes, and it's really off-putting and kind of like, haha, gay people don't matter. I don't know. It's super insensitive, and also, obviously, they're using that I was born that way as sort of like a obvious lie. Which is...
It worries me. There's still people out there who really don't see gay people as normal people, and it's weird, especially after the victory we had this year with the whole gay marriage thing.
Yeah.
it's interesting to see how this sort of thought comes about, because the entire group of people around them, they're all laughing with him as he's making fun of it. I mean, they're reinforcing this terrible behavior of treating this disenfranchised group of people, historically disenfranchised, just like shit, like a punchline. Kind of a bummer, honestly. So then we cut back to John's daughter yet again, and now she's getting ready for a date. She talks about how dating multiple people can be bad, and like how it could be dangerous because breaking up with people all the time could like desensitize you to divorce.
That's so dumb.
When I was that age, if I was getting ready for a date or something, I'd just be like worried about like how I look. Is my breath good? Really, really scary to me that this child is teenager, whatever, is having to deal with all this stress of these, artificial boundaries that her church and her family has put on her. But more than that, she then talks about how her and her boyfriend, where their boundaries are, because obviously sex before marriage totally out because they're very biblically oriented. Oh, yeah. But she says, but we can totally make out and stuff. That's fine. I hate it. I hate it when people who are really, 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 really against sex before marriage for biblical reasons. There are other reasons you could decide to not have sex before marriage. Totally, that's fine. But if it's strictly a biblical reason, saying that you can do other things like make out or third base or whatever the fuck you think is okay.
Arbitrary sexual line you draw in the sand.
I know. When the Bible was written, when these rules were written, you couldn't even fucking hold someone's hand and it not be like a big deal. Do you seriously think there's a loophole in the Bible? Like the intent was like, no, you can totally like suck each other's tongues and stuff. You're fine. Just don't stick a dick in there. No, the Bible saying like, hey, don't be intimate with other people before marriage. Or that's what the church teaches. It might not even strictly be in the Bible like that. But I'm just saying, as far as the church's intention of that rule, it was definitely not, oh, you can totally make out whenever you want, just don't stick it in.
Next we go on to, and we see some of the church services, the theme of which in this one is that we need to infect the culture, so that's good. But anyways, they end up speaking in tongues, which is fucking weird.
If you liked the scenes in God Loves Uganda with the people speaking in tongues, you will love this because there's a couple times where they do it. And it's weirder here because in God Loves Uganda, they frame this megachurch, IHOP, International House of Prayer, as fairly radical in the first place, so you're not that shocked to see it. But this church, I mean, they sing fairly modern Christian rock, which is shit, but I mean, it's fairly progressive for the most part as far as Christianity goes. So they're singing this progressive kind of modern Christian rock and then doing the weird, super extreme talking in tongues thing. It was a very strange combination. I didn't expect to see it. So now we cut back to John yet again, and he talks a little bit about the circumstances of his wife leaving, but it's interesting because he is again very vague. This is what leads me to believe there's more than what they're saying, but again, I'm not gonna say anything for sure, it just seems strange. But he says, there was an affair, and consequently the person who had the affair is no longer with us, and that's as much as he will broach the subject. Like, he does not want to talk about this at all.
Yeah, it's really weird, and the fact that he said no longer with us made me think, did he fucking kill her?
Yeah, it was an odd wording.
Because he's not in prison, so it's super weird. It's either he did some fucked up shit in retaliation of that and didn't end up getting legally in trouble for some amazing reason, or he's just like really mentally not able to discuss this sort of thing. Like the guy does have a lot on his plate, so I could understand if his mental health was suffering a bit from all this shit. So I'm going to give him like a 50-50 pass.
So now we actually get to the night of the actual Hell House, and this is sort of the climax, if you want to call it that. It's actually a pretty impressive operation.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not that surprised, because there was a lot of work put into it, but like they have a command center with, walkie-talkies and screens showing all the rooms. Very cool. But the important thing, remember the cop I talked about from earlier, who was helping them with their firearms?
Yep.
Okay, so looks like 5 minutes before this person's about to go on, he takes a handgun, shows her, and says, here's how you load it. These are blanks. Here's the difference between blanks and live rounds. Make sure there's no thing. Loads it and gives it to her. And this goes for a couple different things. There's a couple different times they use guns during this. They will take these guns that this police officer, who should have extensive firearm training, and he is supervising, they take these guns and fire them at each other with blanks. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand that blanks, they don't fire projectiles, But gun safety is you never point a gun loaded with anything or unloaded. Even if you think a gun is unloaded, you do not point it at someone ever.
That's like the first thing you learn in gun safety training, which I have taken.
Have they not learned from Brandon Lee?
Oh.
Seriously, though, I make a joke, but this kind of thing pisses me off. Because, again, I'm pretty liberal, but as far as the gun issue is concerned, I'm pretty open to people owning guns if they're responsible and as long as there's proper checks or whatever.
Sure.
But this is just ridiculous. They're shooting, one of the things is a suicide thing, which we're going to talk about in a second, and he points it right at his own head and pulls the trigger, and there's a bang. So there is definitely a blank in the cylinder, or not in the cylinder, in the chamber. It's insane that these people are so stupid, and this has nothing to do with religion. They are stupid because they're pointing loaded guns at their head and pulling the trigger, hoping that it's a blank. Obviously they checked, but come on, nothing's 100%, you just don't know. This is ridiculous.
And to continue on this sort of track we're on immediately after we get introduced to this awful gun safety, we go straight into the Columbine scene, which is bad because, remember Columbine, they shoot at people with those guns again. So it's extremely bad. He's firing at others and himself, and it's just so it's just unsafe. I know they're blanks, but still, even blanks though have they're still exploding in there. There's just nothing being shot.
Yeah.
There's no projectile on the other side of the explosion it's creating. So the guy that pulls the trigger and puts it right next to his head, that probably had to hurt.
I have heard of at least one story where someone put a gun to their head as a joke with a blank in it, and they fired the gun, but they didn't expect so much air pressure because it's an explosion. There's an incredible increase in air pressure, and it killed them. It caused like a hemorrhage or something in their head because they were pushing it really, really hard against their head, so it was like airtight. Killed them. So yeah, don't play with blanks like they're nothing, or guns in general. They're very serious business. If you're gonna deal with a gun, make sure you have the proper training and don't be an idiot.
Yeah. And beyond that, every single scene we'll go through, including the Columbine scene, they have these, we'll call them demons. They're people in black robes and they have skeleton masks. They're the demons of the episode or whatever, or I guess the little scene that you're watching. And they're blaming the demons exclusively for all of the things that happen to everyone. So we're not touching the subject of mental illness or bullying or anything or social anxiety or any of the things that actually went into Columbine. We're talking about demons exclusively. It's totally irresponsible.
Then we get just a very brief drug dealing scene, which I will mention is the only time we see a black person in any of these sketches, is the one that's a drug deal. That's a little racist. So
a little bit.
This is just my opinion, but my favorite of these sketches, which we're going to talk about, is this one, and that's the hospital scene where we get a twofer. Ooh. We have a gay man dying of AIDS, and man, for a guy who's just about to die from full-blown AIDS, he's looking pretty good.
He's looking all right. He's looking better than Tom Hanks looked in Philadelphia.
And this girl gets carted in, and apparently she's taken some sort of Plan B pill. It's an imaginary one, though. They made up the name of the pill or whatever, and they're like, it caused her to bleed out, and her entire blood supply, it looks like, has come out of her vagina. And it's amazing. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. I'm not saying there are no complications to Plan B. I'm sure there are, because it's a lot of hormones and stuff. But yeah, how many people just bleed out their entire blood supply into their lap? That's so weird. They cut to the kid actors, and it looks like maybe they're on a break or something, and they're talking about which one's the best one, the abortion scene or the rape scene, and they're just making jokes, and they're like, oh, the rape scene's the best because we get to dance, and it's like, kids, come on, they're 15 or something. I don't expect kids to have a super great sense of what's a big deal and what's not. And of course, we make fun of serious stuff too, but the fact that they're using it to try and convert people, and they're treating it like a game, abortion and rape and people getting date raped and murder, ha 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 ha, it's so fun. Come on, guys, really? You're gonna grow up with a real fucked up perspective of these issues if it continues in this way.
For sure. And then we get a quick interview with a woman who just saw the abortion scene, and she mentions that she's had 2 miscarriages, but she does it with this sort of smile on her face. And then she's like, and thank God I have this kid here. I don't know. It was weird. I didn't really care for it. The worst scene, I think, consensus by far has got to be what we're calling the rape scene, which actually they don't show that part of the, I'm going to call it a play. They don't call that part of the play on film in the documentary, but they do the bookends of it. Basically, there's a girl and she's at a rave, and then some douchebags, look at those douchebags. They picked the perfect kids for those. They were typecast. Basically, she gets talked into taking date rape on purpose, and then, like, she gets raped, and I guess there's a scene, and they talk about it. They talk about how the scene looks, I think, during pre-production, but they don't ever show us on film, and it's supposed to be, like, signified by strobe lights or something, I don't know. But then she comes out of it, and she gets chastised by a demon for it.
The demon's like, it was your fault, and you can't even go to the cops because you don't know how many people raped you, whatever. It's really, really, really messed up. And then it talks about how apparently she was raped by her father when she was younger, too.
And how she should be used to it by now.
It's so messed up. The fact that these people are willing to use this sort of thing as ammunition to try this, and bear in mind, think about this. What the fuck does this have to do with Christianity
Nothing.
at all? This girl got raped. It's not even like she committed a sin as far as the Bible's concerned. She was raped. What is the message
later
here?
on, they have someone talk about that, and the guy defends it in such a way. He's like, well, it's not about that she got raped. It's about that the decisions she made on the way to that were her fault.
They're basically saying it's her fault. It's so messed up. And again, nothing to do with Christianity. And then she takes a picture of Jesus she has, which she has in her nightstand. So apparently this character is Christian anyway.
Oh, yeah.
But somehow this has to do with hell, and she got raped, and it's her fault or something. Yep. And she yells at the Jesus picture, like, why? Why did you let this happen? And it's like, you're really, really on the verge of almost having a good point. Like, the problem of evil isn't a perfect argument, but it is an argument, and it seems like one they're bringing up and sweeping under the rug. Like, yeah, why did God let her get raped if this was a thing that happened? Whatever. So now we get back to John. We're almost done with this story, but he's there, and he's in the audience, and he's watching the scene of the wife having an online affair, and he does not look happy. The dad in it or whatever is very abusive, and he, like, takes her by the throat or whatever and is throwing her around. Again, this is actually pretty good as far as an unbiased documentary goes, because they do just point and shoot, but this seemed very intentional. Like, we're showing you this, like, we're alluding. I don't know if they had any more information than maybe we did, but they're definitely alluding to the fact that they think he was maybe abusive or something in the past. Again, I don't know if that's true. Don't act like that's truth. I'm just saying, as a matter of fact, that is the story that the documentary puts forth and is alluding to, and it's intentional.
At last, we have the money shot of Hell House, which is, of course, hell itself. We have all the people that have died on the way. And they actually had a pretty cool effect with this. They kind of did inset sort of plexiglass rooms, tiny rooms that they could stand in, and they filled them with smoke, and then there's red lights. And then they're like tapping on them from behind. And that's why they have the voiceovers, and it's kind of giving this reverb effect. It's actually kind of cool for a low-budget haunted house. They did a really good job.
As shitty as their intentionality is, and I think their logic is completely fucking flawed, decent production design.
Absolutely.
If they wanted to switch around and be like, hey guys, let's have a normal haunted house this year, they could probably do a pretty good job.
Oh, for sure. Like, their planning is impeccable. It looks really, really good. It's well made.
So then finally, after the hell scene, and it's very intense, you get shots of people during this too who are looking at it, and some of them seem receptive, but plenty do not.
Yeah.
They get them into this small room, much smaller than the other rooms the things were in, and they have this big guy there, and he says, like, hey, the thing's over, there's not going to be any more scares or anything, this isn't a scare tactic or a guilt trip, but you need to accept Jesus into your heart. And it is exactly a guilt trip and a scare tactic. What do you think the Hell House was? That was the whole point, to scare people. He says, this door to my right or whatever, it's going to be open for 5 seconds, and anyone who wants to get saved, go through that door. If you don't, you can stand out here, which is the most high-pressure sales tactic I've ever seen in something like this. It's really, really bad and obvious. And he's like, starts counting down 5, and then he starts talking a little bit about, like, I got another group coming in here in a second, you gotta make a decision. 4, you gotta give your life to Jesus, blah, blah, blah. 3, gets down to 1. Some people do go in there, surprisingly.
Including our main character, air quotes.
Yeah. But a lot of people stay in the room, and it cuts pretty soon, but I think he can already kind of start to hear him shaming them as they're leaving out the other door.
Yeah, he's kind of like, well, either one or two things. Either you don't think that you're a sinner, or you think that you're just going to be just fine. Well, you're not. And then they all walk out or some shit. It's very like prepubescent argument style that this guy has. It's very like, you're a dick because you don't like the same thing I like.
Yeah, it was very uncomfortable to watch. So now John has gone into the room with the prayer, and in this room you can see it's mostly kids and young teens who have decided after the Hell House to get saved, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, that's about right. Yep. They're preying on people who don't really know better and using scare tactics to try and get them before they can kind of say, hey, wait a minute, what about this or that? Anyway, John is sitting there, and he seems like he's actually opening up to this person a lot. And he's saying, like, I really can't forgive my ex-wife. Like, she has ruined my life, basically. I have these kids. Some of them are special needs. I don't know what to do. And at the ending of his story arc, this woman says to him, you know, the best thing I think you can do is pray for that person, and then it's out of your mind and out of your heart and in the hands of Jesus or whatever, and they pray. And clearly on his face, you can see this isn't the answer he wanted at all. This isn't the help he wanted. And it's really, really sad because you can see this guy, John, who's genuinely trying his best in a really shitty situation. Yep. He can't get himself out of this situation. He's in this cycle of a system that only wants him to take his problems to one source, and that's Jesus. And clearly that source isn't solving his problems, so he's not going to go out of that and get counseling or anything he might actually need. Wow. He's stuck forever, maybe, in this cycle of depression and stress because he's placed himself in this situation, in this group, in this culture that has disallowed him from getting help elsewhere. So in part, I think his faith has probably helped him, made him feel a little more in control, but at the same time, that faith that makes him feel in control has become a prison that he has set himself up in, and he can't escape to get the help he really does need. And that's really depressing. But it's also probably the best part of the movie, in my opinion. It's a really strong message.
Yeah, I was actually very surprised that they had such a strong story from just a guy that they didn't really have to prod to get to a place. He just kind of did it on his own. It was just like they caught him at the right time in his life to have this sort of interesting thing interspersed within the overall narrative. It was very interesting. But his story's done, so we have to get back to the very end of the film, which basically talks about how people think the end is near and that all the work they're doing in Hell House is a good thing, and they're bringing people to the Lord, and they're making sure that before Jesus comes here and destroys the world and takes everybody in rapture, they're saving as many people as possible. And then someone says the world is the worst that it has ever been. What the fuck? What? We have Wi-Fi. I have Uber.
The world is the best it's ever been by far. Don't get me wrong.
There's actually statistics. A lot of people think, actually, and there's a recent study that came out not too long ago that said like 85 to 90% of people think the world is worse than it was when they were children, which is not the case. In the last, since I think 1950, there's been a steady increase, and not just in the Western world, in the entire world, population whole, a steady increase of living standards, quality of life, education specifically for women, property owning specifically for women. Like, everything is improving. Disease has gone down, education has gone up. Everything is getting better. There's just so many fucking people now that it doesn't seem like we're making any headway, even though percentage-wise, everything is getting better. So don't worry, people. It's not going to be great, but it will be okay.
So then it just ends with a screenshot that says 75,000 people have gone through their Hell House and 15,000 have converted or recommitted. Now, this sounds very impressive at face value. Yep. However, if you'll consider that it seems like a fairly large church with probably a couple hundred members, maybe more.
It seemed like they had over 1,000, I believe.
And every year they're saying they convert or recommit. I'm assuming the people from the church probably go through the thing and probably recommit quotes, even though they're not really new people. They just do it and like
I think
you're
getting
prayer.
A lot more air quotes recommittals than you are conversions.
Yeah.
Like almost probably 90%.
I'm sure they get tons that night, especially with the young kids and the teenagers. I wonder how much of it sticks, though. I can't imagine all those kids are going to school the next day and be like, guess what, guys?
I can't imagine most of the conversions are nons, though. They're probably other religious factions.
Yeah,
generally, they're going to be other forms of Christianity, especially Catholics or like say a non-denominational Christian, or one of the, I'm going to call them lesser Protestants, like the Methodists or something like that, where they're not as gung-ho.
Probably. So anyway, that is Hell House. It's actually, I'm shocked at how good this documentary was. It looks a little rough, and it's in a weird aspect ratio, like it's in more of a television aspect ratio than a movie one. But if you're willing to look past that and look at the characters and look at what went into this and the mindsets of the people who set up something like this, it's very interesting, very entertaining.
Totally worth a watch. I'd give it a 4.5 out of 5. I'd put it right up there with God Loves Uganda as far as good documentaries that we've watched on this channel.
I'd give it a 4. It's only because it only loses out because the visuals, and it's missing some of the stuff that we've come to expect from documentaries like this now, like the names and helping you keep track of stuff.
I suppose, but it was extremely interesting because I've never, first of all, I've never put together any sort of production like that. I've been part of drama, but only insofar as that I got to go to the plays with them. I just think it was interesting to see the behind the scenes and all the production that went into it, even though it wasn't for something that I would enjoy. The whole thing, I don't know, it just was very interesting, and I wasn't bored, which is hard to do when you're doing a documentary. So I think it's worth a watch. You should probably go try to check it out if you can.
For sure. So, thanks everyone. What you can do is tomorrow, Saturday, we're actually doing what's called an AMA on a subreddit for Drunken Peasants podcast, which we have been on as guests before, and that's why they're having us on. So if you follow the link in the description, you can go to that subreddit, and then tomorrow, which is Saturday the 24th, we will be doing that, and you can ask us questions via text, and we will answer that or whatever. We're also doing our t-shirt sale right now, because people ask for that all year round, and we only do it a couple times a year, so you can check out any of our designs with our logo on it. We have normal one, we have one with a border, without a border, a Christmas one, all that jazz. So check that out.
And also, we have a Pride shirt in the works. We couldn't use the original Pride logo that we had. It had too many colors in it. But I do have one that will probably work coming up in the next couple days, maybe tomorrow. Maybe when this is uploaded, maybe it'll work. Maybe the link will send you to the Pride shirt, because everyone really liked the Pride shirt. We're asking if they could get one. So we should be able to have one for you.
So other than that, if you have any movies you want us to talk about, please do so in the comments, because we haven't done one of these in a while, but they'll be back on the normal schedule. Stuff got a little screwed up because Jake moved, so timing was just a little off.
That is true. If you want, you can always hit us up at Twitter and tell us to do those movies. You can hit Hugo up at Hugo Reloaded.
You can check out Jake at Bible Reloaded.
You can always subscribe, and you can check out more of our movie reviews, chick tracks, and our Bible study. If you want to help support the channel, you can always donate to our Patreon campaign. And if you do that, you have access to all of our patron-only hangouts that we do once a month live. And then, of course, you can watch those again later whenever you want. Because clearly, you need more of us in your lives. So, thanks, everyone. Until next time, I'm Hugo. And I am Jake.
And this has been the Bible Reloaded. And it's spooky or something, because... Jump scare.